Hey folks, Kilt-Man here, Kilt-Man! At your services. How are you all? Hope you're doing very, very well. Budge up. Somebody order Chinese? As promised folks, here is my big and in-depth review of Hammer's 1974 Kung Fu and Fangs classic, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. You see beside me a recreation of the mask that is worn by two of the seven vampires. This is crafted by Noah Rivers for Trick or Treat Studios. I will post the link down below to my full review and description of that mask for your further edification. Cheers, y'all. You're hearing James Bernard's awesome score for the movie playing in the background, and we'll discuss that at length as well. But yeah, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, as everyone knows, the 70s was the death gong for Hammer. And yet Hammer did produce a lot of really great, pushing the boundaries, experimental, breaking new ground sort of material. The likes of Vampire Circus, the likes of Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, and especially Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter really explored new territory within the given ramifications and borderlines of Hammer's gothic excess. And of course it explored modern day horror with Dracula entering swinging Chelsea, Dracula AD 1972, and of course the satanic rites of Dracula. But the less said about those two, the better, really. But the really weird thing is that, kind of forgetting the timeline he'd already concocted for the Christopher Lee Dracula run of vampire movies, they kind of just eschew all of that and go back to period history with this incredibly off-the-wall genre fusion, kung fu and vampires. And the reason behind this would be Hammer needed to inject new blood. It needed more audiences. It needs more bums on seats to watch their stuff and make more moolah. The Shaw brothers, Run Shaw and Run Me Shaw in Hong Kong. These two couldn't half move. If you wanted to catch them to make a deal, you'd have to learn to run very, very fast. The runs. They already had a great stable full of great chop-socky movies, but they had discovered now that their rivals Golden Harvest, who had Bruce Lee working for them and were being distributed in the States and all the West by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers, who were also distributing Hammer's movies as well for a long-standing sort of contract. So Hammer and the Shaw brothers think, well, hang on a minute, let's join forces. East meets West, yeah, vampires and kung fu martial arts. It's gotta sell. Enter the Dragon had been huge and was still absolutely huge. It was massive at this time, and Warner Bros. Were really, really sitting on the laurels with this one. So the Shaw brothers and Michael Carreras, Hammer, join cahoots. Michael Carreras sends over Roy Ward Baker, a stalwart Hammer director, goes over to Hong Kong with a script by Don Houghton. And as Roy Ward Baker would always say, it was not the best time he'd ever had over there. The sound stages weren't soundproof, they were little more than Nissan huts. And the desert sequence, which he wanted this huge, because for the first time they were filming overseas with extensive exterior locations and like big outdoor shoots, and he wanted a scene of a caravan train passing across a desert. Well, they never got that desert. They got just the high hinterlands on the Chinese border, and it was just a few acres of space to use. But the thing is though, having been wined and dined on the Bray Studios output of gothic horror for Hammer, and the Blackwoods, which were used all the time, and Elstree Studios, to suddenly see these huge expanses, or seemingly huge expanses, of land and mountains and hilltops and forests, wow, and definitely a sunnier climb as well. It definitely changed the visual aesthetic of the movie. So Roy Ward Baker's sort of, protestations aside, the film still looks fantastic. The camera work is great. A film for Hammer had not looked this good since Dracula Risen from the Grave with Freddie Francis' fabulous filters, his coloured lenses and all that. This has some great atmospheric, evocative colours, shadow play. But, so this film, a hodgepodge, a melding, fusion of two genres. The Chinese had a long-standing tradition of using vampires, monsters, ghouls, zombies, and martial arts. They've mixed the two together before, but this is the first time that a huge big studio like Hammer, a long-established traditional Western superpower, basically, was going to combine with Chinese folklore. And that's what the film does really well. Don Houghton's script, his story, revolves around Ka, who is a Chinese warlord who is lording over the 7 golden vampires. And because he has them he has an entire village in his thrall. And for a long time they've just had power, indomitable. But for some reason, his vampires, all 7 of them, have gone to sleep. They've rested. So he journeys all the way through those highland hinterlands at the Chinese border, doubling for Transylvania to go to Castle Dracula, and there to reawaken from his slumber John Forbes Robinson as Count Dracula, because Christopher Lee said, I'm not doing any more of these. No, I've had it up to me back fangs with these ridiculous parts for me. No, I'm not doing any more Draculas for you. So that was it. So enter John Forbes Robinson, who is sadly actually overdubbed by, I always forget this guy's name, John Keys Reese, something like that anyway, who was also the voiceover guy for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and for John Borman in Zardoz as the voice of the Tabernacle, and in John Borman's Excalibur as the voice of the Holy Grail itself. Whom do you serve? He was also in the Aladdin advert, tense, nervous headache. So he does the voice for John Forbes Robinson, who, when Carr meets him, Dracula rises Nosferatu style, like that, whoa, out of his coffin. Like that. And then glides, in a great shot, glides towards him. Why have you awakened me from my slumber? What is it you want? I have pledged my life to you. I'm a devotee disciple to you. Please give me the power to reawaken my 7 golden vampires. Why would I need you? And Forbes Robinson is wearing pancaked on makeup. But the thing is, you've got to look at, this is a Chinese traditional sort of take on the gothic vampire story. So that elaborate makeup there, which only in the first couple of shots does he look really OTT, a bit like RuPaul. But once you see him properly, and his commanding presence, his height, and when he puts the fangs and the bite on, he actually does look really sinister. So I do like his performance as Dracula, which only bookend this movie. He says to Carr, yeah, all right then, yeah, we'll do this. I'll go back to your province, and I'll lord over these vampires. I'll give you back your power. But the thing is, I need your body. So smoke, mirrors, swirly cape, and he will become this Chinese warlord, who looks just like the actor and stuntman Al Leung, who's in Lethal Weapon and Die Hard and Big Trouble in Little China. Big Trouble in Little China owes a lot to this movie, by the way. But anyway, as does even Blade, Wesley Snipes, chop-socky and vampires. It was done here first. So Dracula then travels in the guise of this Chinese warlord back to this little province in this huge demonic pagoda where he will have his 7 vampires. And what they do is they lord over this village, and very much like the bandits in The Seven Samurai for Akira Kurosawa, which this film owes a huge debt to as well, and The Magnificent Seven. They will go in and they'll pilfer young and nubile ladies, and they'll put them in these little sacrificial altar things, these little shrines, and they'll put the bite on, and the blood will run down into a bubbling cauldron. However, everything seems to be going all so well. And then as Peter Cushing, returning for one final time as Professor Van Helsing, is over there at the Chongqing University lecturing for the Chinese academia on European and Asian vampirism to a local bunch of students who really don't seem to have too much time for this, which is a bit odd considering their long-standing tradition of vampires and ghouls and the undead. So, and they know that Van Helsing is this renowned vampire killer. So I bet they scoff and they all leave the auditorium. One guy stays. Van Helsing has recounted the tale of this province, this legendary province, lorded over by the 7 golden vampires who wear golden masks and have huge, sort of blingy, bat-shaped amulets hanging around their chests on chains. But one guy remains. His name is Hai Shang. And later that night, for some unknown reason, instead of just knocking at the front door of Van Helsing's abode, he will, clandestine, commando style, almost like a ninja, come into Van Helsing's abode just to speak to him, basically, and say, that legend you said about, it is true. This is David Chang. David Chang was the Shaw Brothers' answer to Bruce Lee, an accomplished martial artist, and he'd been in several movies for them already. He would also be in The Water Margin, the great long-standing TV show The Water Margin. And he says that the legend's true. I know it to be true. I'm from that village. My grandfather, which is actually him, and he's seeing a flashback. He's got a wispy old moustache, greyish hair, goes to rescue his daughter, from the clutch of the 7 golden vampires. He breaks in there, he sees this ritual, he sees all these guys about to put the bite on. He breaks in, starts fighting, tries to free his daughter. This is now a flashback sequence which Hai Ching. A lot of this is going to happen, folks. If I start referring to notes, you'll understand why. There's a lot of names, for God's sake. And I'm getting older now. And he breaks in there, he starts fighting them, he tries to free his daughter, but his daughter gets run through, because these guys not only have fangs, but they have swords as well. And they're quite proficient martial artists as well, as we'll discover. So he fails, makes a complete balls up of his mission to rescue his daughter. But what he manages to do is to take off one of the amulets of one of these 7 golden vampires, a bat-shaped amulet, and he legs it. So Dracula, in the form of Car, bangs the gong, boom, boom, which awakens the army of the shambling, nay, hopping undead, all outside of this huge pagoda demonic temple. They rise in green and blue and red filtered light with smoke and all sorts. They rise from their graves, hundreds of them, and led by the 7 golden vampires on horseback in slow motion. Very, very reminiscent of De Osorio's Tombs of the Blind Dead series, where had the Knights Templar with their skeletal faces, long hair and goatee beards, riding horses in slow motion after their victims. So yeah, there's a huge heritage here, a pedigree has been cross-pollinated within this movie. Akira Kurosawa, De Osorio, Kung Fu, Gothic literature, it's all here in this melting pot. So, anyway, they pursue this guy who's now legging it down back to the village, but he's knackered, he's harassed by all of these. There's a huge army coming after him. He manages to find a Buddhist shrine, and he manages to put this amulet there, which is not a good thing for the 7 golden vampires. And it kills one of the vampires, the one whose amulet's been stolen. He ends up dying. So, we've learned that there's now only 6 golden vampires, and those remaining 6 will slay Hai Ching's grandfather, I think it is. In a great sequence, they all surround him and he is slashed to death. but he has took down one of the 7 golden vampires. So that's before our story totally begins, because so now there's not 7 golden vampires. There's only 6 of them. But Hai Ching, or David Chang, as well, better call him that because I know that name's right. He's got 6 brothers, all from the same village. 6 brothers and a sister. So there's 7 brothers and a sister who are all highly trained martial artists. All have different weapons. One has a javelin, one has 2 axes, one uses knives, one uses a sword, one uses a bow and arrow. And 2 of them are twins. And they fight as a single unit. They link arms and fight together, which is brilliant, brilliant. And he says, look, Van Helsing, please, with your experience, come back to my village, because it's all true. The vampires are there again. There's only 6 of them now, but they're lorded over. Please come, you must help us. So, Van Helsing, together with his son, Leland Van Helsing, played by Robin Stewart, I think it is, who was seen in TV's Man About the House. He joins along as well, but Peter Cushing says, well, but we'll need funding for this. It's a very expensive journey to cross China, and with all the equipment and things that we need a budget. Enter Julie Eeg. Now, is it Julie Eeg or is it Julie Edge? Her Scandinavian scream queen, worked for Hammer before, very beautiful. Wears a short skirt in this with a split up the side and shows quite a lot of thigh in lots of great little moments. And she's a wealthy widow who's in Hong Kong as well. And Leland has been trying to entertain her, but he incurs the wrath in so doing of the local Tong chieftain. Yeah. And this guy looks just like Lao Che from Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. It's not the same guy, but it looks just like him. And he acts the same as well, And, excuse me one second while I go and answer the door. Why does this always happen to me? The rudeness of some people. And I wouldn't mind, but that wasn't even a package for me to open. No. Oh, we'll make amends with this. So yeah, the local Tong chieftain. The Tongs, by the way, Hammer had done a Tong movie before, The Terror of the Tongs, with Christopher Lee, again in the Fu Manchu style makeup. Very, very, racially sort of wrong in so many ways. And by the way, the Tongs, Hammer should have done a bit of research on this. The Tongs were actually a brotherhood, a secret society, which was set up by Chinese immigrants in other countries, namely the USA. That's where the Tongs were based. Not in China, not in Hong Kong. So that they'd have to have been sort of triads really, not the Tongs. But anyway, this local Tong chieftain has took a fancy to this Vanessa. I think she's called Vanessa. This Julie Eeg, Julie Egg. It's E-G-E, and I'm never sure how you pronounce that. But she said, no, I'm not going with him. And he's offended by that. I'm going with the Van Helsings. So this Tong chieftain sets his band of merry men upon them, and their rickshaws are dropped, the 2 carriers are slain. But just when even the young Van Helsing is getting into some fisticuffs with these guys, the day is saved by the brothers, these martial arts brothers from the village, who come in, save the day, slay all these Tongs, and then get introduced to Van Helsing. And then Julie Eeg says, well, you need funding for this mission. You've just saved my life. I'm a rich widow. Let's go. It sounds like a great adventure. So now, funding in place. You've got a bit of eye candy in place, and you've got 7 brothers who are awesome martial artists plus the sister, Sue, yeah, who's May in the film. Sue. Look, it's not She, because that's a bit of we won't go into that, will we? So now they're all together, and even the sister is proficient in martial arts too. Along the way, what you thought was going to be a burgeoning romance between Leland Van Helsing and Julie Egg, doesn't happen. She falls for the main brother, the one who recruited Van Helsing. She falls for him. And Leland Van Helsing falls for May, the sister. Yeah. So in little campfire sessions, they may sit together, but they will, him and Leland and Vanessa, but they will look at these other people, these oriental counterparts, and think, yeah, I fancy that more than you. So that's how the film transpires in relationships. Peter Cushing, tremendous, as always. Really, really gaunt now, and looking terrible. He's mourning his beloved wife Helen, which Hammer fans and devotees, we know how badly it affected him, and you can see it in his face, you can see it in his demeanour, but it never stopped his professionalism, never stopped his performances, and he is action-packed in this. He's an older guy, he's much more frail. You see him in his pith helmet, which does look a bit ridiculous. And he's props Peter, he's forever mopping sweat from his face and his neck, and his finger. They sit around a campfire. The European vampire can be slain. A wooden stake through the heart, or the shaft of a silver blade like yours. And there's a great little moment as well. David Chang says to him, like, well, what about fire? Can fire kill them? The European vampire, yes. These oriental ones, I don't know. Why would where the vampires are make a difference to fire burning them? I know, it's all supernatural, it's all folklore, it's all legend, but it does seem a bit of a daft thing. Oh, by the way, yeah, fire does kill them. In fact, they can be killed by arrows as well, so there's kind of shakiness on the full rules and regimen for how to dispose of these oriental vampires. By the way, there's only 6 of them now, not 7. But it seems that the remaining vampires now want to try to resurrect their buddy. So they will storm into the village again, they'll get some more women, and every time they go into a hut or a house or whatever and pull out a nubile young girl, they'll rip her top open so the little jigglies are exposed. And there's still hundreds of people in this village because the villagers all come out with pitchforks. Going back to the old Universal and earlier Hammer movies there, villagers in protest against monstery come out with pitchforks and hoes and try to strike them down. But these guys are incredibly good and can hold back multitudes, swinging swords and hacking people down left, right and centre. It is gory. There's lots and lots of people getting slashed across the chest, and then they'll turn around, throat, keel over. So they take it, they're still reigning over this village. Why the people don't just up sticks and move, lock, stock and barrel, God only knows. But they didn't do it in the Seven Samurai either, so there you go. So now we know what their mission is. They were trying to resurrect the 7th one, but they're also doing untold atrocities to this village. So it's making it even more essential that our heroes get there and save the day. They're attacked en route by the Tongs again. This warlord really wasn't happy about the effrontery and losing a few men in a nighttime scuffle, so he sends out a veritable army. So you actually get a huge pitched battle early on in the movie where the 7 brothers and the sister will fight against these multitudes of Tongs, and the fighting is terrific. The fighting is great. This was made in 73, released in 74, but you'd had many martial arts movies before then, and especially Enter the Dragon was huge at this time, right around the same time. So this sort of thing, people were loving it and lapping it up. And Roy Ward Baker will always say that, look, they said to me, no, you don't direct the fight sequences. We've got Chow Chien, I think the name was, uncredited. He's our in-house fight choreographer, stuntman, and he will direct these scenes. Baker said, no, it's my movie, it's my vision, I'm making it. So you can choreograph it, you can arrange it all, but I'm the one that's going to be doing the directing of these scenes. So there seems to be a bit of controversy over this, because Baker always insisted that, yeah, I stuck to my guns and I made those scenes, I directed those scenes. And to this day, the day being when he said this, when he quoted this, that they're still some of the best fight sequences in Hong Kong cinema. Right, okay. But Chow Cheng did choreograph all these fights, and they're fights amongst lots of people. So you've got the 7 brothers and the sister fighting various people at once. And if you look at the long shots, which are Deputy Roy Ward Baker, you'll have fighting all the way around the frame. And if you look at it, they are all fighting. Well, the thing you've got to remember is that Chow Cheng has done, or Chi Cheng, I've probably got that name wrong as well, did, without doubt, choreograph and stunt arrange all those fight sequences, which to my mind actually means he pretty much directed them. Roy Ward Baker and I think Roy Ford did the camera work, and great camera work it is too. Proper widescreen, you know, this is proper CinemaScope we're talking here. So so the film looks different. The lighting, the colour, the setting, the location work, the huge amount of cast, and the great location shooting and the great wide angle photography. So yeah, they might have great photography there, but I doubt very much that Roy Ward Baker was the one saying, well, you need to bring your scythe down there, you dodge this elbow, then your knee, then an uppercut and not. No, he didn't do that. He's arranged the camera, but Chow Cheng has done all of this fight choreography. So he's pretty much directed those scenes. So I'll let you guys pick the bones out of that. Cheers, y'all. But the fights are great, and the fights make up a huge proportion of this movie. This is without doubt Hammer's most action-packed film. They had done pirate movies, war movies. Captain Kronos, just before this, had been elaborate with its fight sequences, lots of swashbuckling in there, and to this day, one of my favourite Hammer movies of all time. It's just fabulous. But so is this. This ranks up there as well for me, because I think it's a special movie. It's a unique blend. But this has just so many fight sequences, and they last a long time, and they're epic in size and scope. They fill the frame with frenetic action. Yes, some of the blows are missing, and by quite some margin, quite some water margin, but it's still dexterous, agile, kinetic and exciting to watch, and a lot of death takes place, and there's plenty of gore there too. So after the fight with the Tongs in the desert, our little caravan of heroes sets up in a cave, whereupon they're attacked by 3 of the vampires who are masquerading as bats up in the high parts of the cave, who suddenly become 2 of these blonde-haired or white-haired versions and a dark-haired one, all of whom are slain in that sequence. But not only are the vampires there as well, but the shambling, hopping hordes of the undead, their undead army, who rise all the time from these pits of death outside this devilish pagoda. And these guys are following the Chinese tradition of Chang Shi, which is, or Chiang Shi, sorry, which is their version of the undead, where the undead summoned will have their arms outstretched and will not be able to bend their legs because of rigor mortis, so they are hopping. Some say that this legend was born out of the dead being conveyed on rafts of bamboo, and the bamboo would begin to bend with the journey, and the flexibility of these would make the limbs appear to be hopping. I mean, it depends how they're strapped to it. If they're strapped on a sort of travail, then they'd be lying head downwards, so they wouldn't be hopping. So are they tied upright in these things? In which case the bending of the bamboo would make their limbs appear to hop a little bit. But that, regardless, that's how the legend came to be. And what these undead warriors would do, all the victims of the vampires, what they would do. In the legend, they would drain the chi from victims, the life force from their victims, not just to put the bite on. But in this film, they just act as aggressors, enforcers, a huge hopping, skipping, weird ensemble of just from beyond the grave aggression, and they look amazing. You might think, hopping, for real? You look stupid. But as they get closer, and you're like, they're not stopping. Oh shit, off we go. They look amazing with steam rising from them and smoke and vapours, and James Bernard's awesome music as well. It just lends this really nightmarish quality to these guys. This army coming down the road, led by vampires on horseback in slow motion, twirling swords around, with their long hair billowing and these golden death masks on them. However, the makeup design for these things is not that great. And I forgot the name of the guy. Hang on a minute, I'll just check my notes. What is his name? Les Bowie did the effects, the visual effects. Wu Ching did the actual makeup. And the makeup, as you see here, it's not brilliant. And the shambling hordes of the undead tend to wear cadaverish grey things like this, sort of like very wooden or paper mache masks, and you think, it's not really that great. But it is in keeping with traditional Chinese folklore and the way that their monsters are depicted. So in that cross-pollination of Hammer Gothic and Oriental folklore, it works. And I think they do look great in those sequences of them rising from the grave. It's never explained how, when they go back, do they go and bury themselves up again? Because they keep coming out of the same rocky piles and obelisks get turned over. You know, it's a bit awkward, isn't it? You think, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just sleep up top this time, because you're going to bang that gong again, aren't you? Anyway, the fight in the cave, even Peter Cushing gets involved in this. When one of these with the white hair comes after him, Peter Cushing actually falls over and he falls into one of the campfires, and he picks up a wooden stave, a torch with the flames, and he's like that with it. And then David Chang leaps up behind and does a double kick and knocks one of these into the flaming torch which Peter Cushing's holding. It goes up in flames. So yes, in other words, that question you asked before, but what about fire? Does fire work on these? Well, in the European case it does. And it works in the Oriental case as well. So they vanquish 3 vampires there with no losses amongst themselves. And then in a really strange moment, David Chang, who's recruited him, does actually... I don't think we can do it. Professor, what chance do we stand now? You know. And Van Helsing quite rightly says, what are you on about? We've just defeated the army of them and we've killed 3. So that means there's only 3 of them left. So what are you on about? With no casualties here. Yes, we're all knackered, but yeah, we've halved the enemy. What's your problem? And you've also seen that these shambling, hopping undead, if you go for the heart, put your hand in and just, well, it's just dusty flesh and ash comes out. So they end up going to the village, and then a great sequence which is very like defending the village from the bandits in the Seven Samurai or in Magnificent Seven. They build a pit of fire, wooden stakes, and yes, with the gong going, the undead army shambles in. In that great final battle there, which is a prolonged, extensive battle sequence, which is great to watch. You have Vanessa, Julie Eeg, one of them puts the bite on her, David Chang, goes over to save her, kills the vampire, but then she immediately has turned, in a bit like Count Yorga Vampire, when the female heroine does become straight away, in the twist sort of ending, she's one of the undead as well. Count Yorga, by the way, I need to cover that at some point. They're great. I love those two movies. Robert Quarry is fantastic. That's Count Yorga. But Julie Eeg then tries to put the bite onto David Chang, and Van Helsing's no! There's a bamboo stake, so David Chang pushes her onto that. But because he loves it, he throws himself onto it too. So 2 of our heroes have been killed there. Also, some of the brothers get slain here too. The 2 twins who fight around together, they link arms and fight together. One of them gets his hand chopped off, and the 2 will be killed, but they'll die together, arms linked, and the severed hand will be beside them. Great touch. Mei, Shi Su, will be abducted by the last remaining golden vampire, who will take her back to the pagoda, and Ka, is it Ka or is it Shah, who is Dracula masquerading? What is it? Is it Ka or Shah? It's Ka. Now, and he'll strap it into this thing, of course, to try to put the bite on it, let her blood drain away. But Leland Van Helsing will go into there and fight this guy, coupled with Van Helsing and the last remaining vampire slayer brothers, and they will get her back, but they'll also boot this last vampire into the bubbling cauldron of blood, whereupon he will cavort around, frying tonight, Chinese food, and then just bones will come up. So he's been slain as well. Now we've only got the warlord left, Ka. And Ka, he says, Van Helsing, yes, you've plagued me for years. And then Van Helsing will realise, oh, so hang on a minute, you really are Dracula, as James Bernard's awesome score will always serenade him. And James Forbes Robinson will transform back into his pancake makeup Dracula, and he'll fling Van Helsing around, but he'll also end up getting impaled again. That's the time-old method. And Van Helsing, who's done this to him so many times, will still, as he dissolves and in agony, writhes in agony, Van Helsing will still go, come on, you should be used to that by now. You've done it to him 1,000 times over. And don't rest on your laurels, because he's bound to come back, because indeed he was meant to come back. In the next vampire movie, Dracula movie, was meant to be Dracula in India. That was its working title. And it was meant to be the Hindi brides to Dracula, or something like that. Never happened. Never happened because the success of this movie was great in the UK, but didn't happen in the US. Why? Because Warner, who were distributing the Shaw Brothers movies and the Golden Harvest movies and the Hammer movies, were focusing purely on Golden Harvest and Bruce Lee. So this film sat on the shelf in America for a good couple of years, and then was released in a cut down version, The Seven Brothers Meet Dracula, and it really didn't do well at all. Hammer's next movie, To the Devil a Daughter, an adaptation of Dennis Wheatley's novel, was a complete disaster, a cataclysmic disaster. Finally putting the nail in the coffin of Hammer's initial reign of terror in the cinemas. And that was it. Peter Cushing would not work for Hammer again, apart from in the Hammer House of Horror episode, The Silent Scream, which is terrific. But he would go on to do The Ghoul for Tyburn, and in a horrible and apocryphal story which I've heard, is that he didn't enjoy his experience making this movie, Seven Golden Vampires, and he was not enjoying his time on The Ghoul either. But in his spare time, he was obsessed to focus on something to take his mind off the loss of his beloved Helen. He was trying to build a reproduction, a model of the Chinese Dracula warlord's pagoda, and it took him ages to do this, and he constructed it, and once he'd done it, he then burnt the clothes he'd worn whilst constructing it. Oh dear, that's, if true, that's not a good insight into the poor Peter Cushing's life at that time. Absolutely in the throes of bereavement. Terrible, terrible story that, if true. God knows where that model ever ended up, but maybe he burnt it as well, I don't know. Peter, And he's great in this movie. He is great. He's always great. He never gives less than a stellar performance. Even with pith helmet and finger pointing and all this, the props and all that. But he's fighting. He engages in the kung fu, fisticuffs and chop-socky. He's in there. He's involved and he's doing his best. James Bernard's score is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Listen to this. What he would do for this, he would bring in oriental instruments, Chinese flute, chiang, and other instruments of ethnic origin, lots of percussion, lots of woodwinds, the typical shrieking strings. You try saying that after walloping some whiskey down your throat. But his incredible action music. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to begin to play this, but I asked my good friend David Huckvale. David Huckvale is a learned scholar, a lecturer, a musician, a composer, a great acclaimed author, and a huge authority on the Hammer movies. He wrote a great discussion about James Bernard and his work for Hammer. And I asked him, I took the privilege to ask him, I said, what are your thoughts on the Seven Golden Vampires and your memories of it? Because he spoke to James Bernard himself about composing this movie and on what are his thoughts on the film as well. And he took the time and the effort to send me this. Seven Golden Vampires. James Bernard was never more resonant. Isn't the music amazing? Shame about the film, though it's a glorious scream from start to finish. Well, the story is that when the film reached Phil Martell was the conductor and arranger of James Bernard's music for Hammer. When the film reached Phil Martell back in England, he discovered, with very little time to rectify it, that the Shaw Brothers had assembled a music track that was, in Phil's words, unbelievable! Unbelievable! Unbelievable, David! You wouldn't believe it! Yes, I get the picture, Phil. They had put one track on top of another and reversed the top track to cover their copyright infringing, too many tracks. And the result was, well, unbelievable! So remedial action was urgently required, and Phil got on the phone to James Bernard. James then went into purdah, as he always called the composing process, and came up with his amazing score. Later, he added the pantomime march for the LP version. In brackets, James was a great fan of the big spectacular West End pantos. He showed me a set design once, which hung on his whole wall. It was called The Kingdom of Cool Whiteness. Isn't that awesome? But of course, I was rather more into hot blackness at the time, he added with a wink. He says, this is David saying, is that quotable? Well, I don't suppose he'd mind. Job done, he collapsed with a large bottle of rum and probably put on the Warsaw Concerto and a pair of slippers. A few days later, his phone rang again. It was Kevin Francis. Would you score the Ghoul for me? Ty Burns, the Ghoul, Peter Cushing. To which James, in characteristic fashion, replied, Kevin, I simply couldn't. The legend of the Seven Golden Vampires nearly killed me. I think he does an amazing job in combining the Dracula of old, Dracula, the Gothic, huge bravura qualities, the Hammer stuff, with the orientalist required for the new location. The LP was even better, I think. That prologue under David Huckvale, that's the guy who doubled the voice for Forbes Robinson playing Dracula. That prologue under David Huckvale's narration, it's amazing writing. It's sepulchral, though largely constructed from ostinato figures, which are so useful in horror films as they create such a sense of expectation. You're just waiting for something to happen. I can't agree more. That is just amazing. Thank you, David, for your input there. But listen to James Bernard's score here. This just builds and builds. These are the fight sequences. You will see the army of the dead rise, and it will build. Those ostinatos building, hands coming out of the grave, and then these hopping creatures forming ranks and hopping down the trail after a victim or heading towards the village, breaking through the village gates, the fortified defences. And the vampires at the head, swirling swords, riding horseback. build, build, build. It's incredible stuff. It's so vivid. James Bernard saying, it nearly killed me. Can you imagine the orchestra, or being at the front of the orchestra while they're playing all this? Just, they'd be rising out of their chairs. The cellos, the woodwinds, the strings, the brass, the horns, everyone be coming forward, forward to these vicious crescendos. You'd be shrinking back in terror. As Peter Cushing would say, terror. Listen to it. It's driving, it's relentless. That rhythm, that beat, the accelerated pulse to it. Bass drums, or the Chinese drums. It's awesome stuff, isn't it? Searingly exciting. The best elements of this movie, the fighting, these guys, the music, Peter Cushing. Everybody does well. The survivors at the end, you have Leland and you have Van Helsing, have both survived, but they've saved May. So, Leland and May are together. So one sister has survived as well. A bit like the Magnificent Seven and Seven Samurai, not all of the seven, okay there's 8, including the sister, are going to make it out of there. And that's great as well. So you've got sacrifice on their part, you've got death, loss as well. But you've had these grand showboating battles. It's all, the stakes are high, literally stakes are high. They're trying to save the village, they're trying to save their own beloved companions from slaughter and undeath, and take out the Lord of the Undead as well. So it's a great, when Van Helsing, as Peter Cushing, first fought Dracula in Dracula 1958, and Van Helsing, even old then and gaunt Peter Cushing, runs across the table, the table, pulls the curtains down, and with 2 crucifixes, 2 candlesticks, a flaming crucifix, dynamic fighting Christopher Lee. Even though Christopher Lee's not in this is the final time that Peter Cushing's Van Helsing would meet Dracula. He gets thrown around by Dracula. He will still fight the hordes of the undead. It's great to watch, great to behold. Folks, I am a massive fan of this movie. You can probably tell the fusion of kung fu and vampirism started before this movie and has gone on since. Look at Big Trouble in Little China. Okay, they're not vampires, but they are demonic warlords, and the martial arts features heavily. But look at Blade, martial arts, vamps. There you go. Hammer's The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires is a glorious guilty pleasure. It might not be the best film that they ever made, but it's a wonderful experiment in something new, blending their traditional vampire tropes with new exotic locations and the new vogue for kung fu fighting and hyperkinetic filmmaking. My God, they should have heralded in a new chapter for Hammer. Didn't. It sank. It sank that final stake just another inch or 2 through the corpse that Hammer was becoming. Such a shame. As I said before, the 70s was the death knell for Hammer, but so many great things came out. Hands of the Ripper, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, pushing boundaries, changing what you thought was going to happen, putting twists and spins on traditional stories of Gothic terror. Frankenstein and Monster Hell, more gore. Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, Vampire Circus really pushes a lot of boundaries. I'm going to be covering that soon, Vampire Circus. I love that movie. But this, the fusion, 2 genres. Dracula! Folks, I have been and always shall be Kilt-Man at your services. Hope you enjoyed this. David, once again, sir, I doff my cap to you. If I had a cap on, I would be doffing it right now. I will raise a whiskey to you, sir. Thank you for your input. Very much appreciated as always. Folks, 7 Golden Vampires. Watch it, love it, cherish it. It's awesome. Now, to order some Chinese. Folks, I have been Kilt-Man. I shall be again. And I will see you all. Laters! Yes, I do believe that Asian vampires can be killed by fire too. Yeah, they can.